If your A-level Edexcel English Literature Paper 3 Poetry is coming up tomorrow and you're a little bit worried or concerned or just need a bit of gentle reassurance about what's coming your way, then this is exactly the video for you. In the next 10 or maybe 15 minutes, I'm going to take you through what the paper looks like, what the expectations are for each of the questions, and what an examiner might be looking for in your responses. Okay, so I've picked a paper from 2024 to have a look at. I'm going to talk you through the timings and my approach to the questions. This isn't really a revision video in terms of the text because I wouldn't be able to do that within a short video. So this is really just a walkthrough of the paper. As you should know, it is a 2-hour, 15-minute exam. Now, I think the 15 minutes is definitely reading time because there is an unseen element to this, which I'll come to in a moment. There are two sections, Section A and Section B. Both are equally weighted at 30 marks, culminating in a mark out of 60. So do keep an eye on the clock because despite the fact 2 hours, 15 minutes sounds like a long exam, there is quite a lot to do in that time. So question 1 will always be an option of 2 questions, and one of the poems within the question will be the unseen. On this occasion it was a poem called Stillwater Cove by Edexcel, and the other poem will be one taken from the anthology cluster that you should have been studying over the past 2 years. So this isn't a memory test. You're not expected to be able to remember every facet of each of the poems. You are given a source booklet with all the blank poems in there. So in this case, there's a blank copy of Stillwater Cove, and you are given copies of the 2 alternative poems that you may wish to answer on. In this case, Out of the Bag and From a Journal of a Disappointed Man. I would say you need to spend time considering both of the options. If you're not sure which of the 2 to do, then I would do a quick plan for both. The common misconception is that one of these options may be easier than the other. That's simply not the case. Both questions should be equally weighted. The only difference really is your perception or your comfortability or your confidence with whichever of the poems is named. So it could be that straight away you zoom in on Out of the Bag and that's one of your favourite poems, that's one you've spent lots of time on, or it could be one that you absolutely dread, in which case that's why you have the option of a second. In terms of dealing with the unseen poem, and this is where you need to spend the lion's share of your time because, of course, despite the fact you are given copies of each of the other poems, you should know those. They should have been a feature of your revision. So really, the blank copies of those poems are just there for your reference. They shouldn't be there for you to be spending any great deal of time on getting to grips with. They should really just serve as a reminder. You do need to spend some time thinking about the unseen poem. Now again, depending on who your teacher has been and their approaches to how they've taught you to deal with unseen poetry, there is a vast spectrum of ways into dealing with unseen poems. If you wish to have a quick reference, a quick model that I often remind my students of is the CLIPS model. That stands for content. What do you think the poem is generally about? Language, language features, literary features. So in terms of similes, metaphors, personification, ambiguity, juxtaposition, euphemism, irony, any of those kinds of things that you're noticing would be language or literary features. I will always be there is imagery. What kind of pictures are being conjured up in your mind when you first come to a poem? And why do we think those images are quite prevalent? P would be your personal response or personal engagement. Now, I often say to students with unseen poems, What do you think the poet was trying to say to you by writing this poem? What do you think was their message? Why did they write this poem? If you can get to grips with the purpose of what the poet was trying to say to the reader, then you're well into having some personal response and engagement. And the S, which is the one that students often shy away from, is the structure. How is this put together? Now, often you can make some comments on structure just on first glance without even reading the poem or getting that much to grips with it, because you'll be able to tell straight away whether it's one long stanza or if in this case it's several shorter stanzas. Straight away I can see that each of these stanzas are 3 lines. So I would be questioning straight away, why is that the case? Is there a rhyme scheme here? Is there not a rhyme scheme? If there's not a rhyme scheme, blank verse, free verse, why might that be? Other structural points might be things to do with enjambment and flow. So that would be a very quick and easy reference. Obviously at A level, your teachers may have taught you a more involved approach. Never discount the importance of the title. The title is your way into the piece, so think about what might be suggested with the title. In this case, Stillwater Cove, Stillwater. That sounds quite ominous. Does that give me any hints, or does that give me a way into what this poem might be about? So I'm not going to do a full analysis of this poem. If you wished me to make videos on how I would dealing with unseen poetries, then drop me a comment below and I'll maybe make some more videos along those lines. But that would be a quick reminder of some of the things that you would need to be talking about in approaching an unseen poem. But always remember that there is a question to answer, and there should be some sort of link in the question between the unseen poem and the poem taken from the anthology. So in this case, compare the methods both poets used to explore childhood memories. Or in this case, compare the methods both poets used to explore the act of observing. So remember, you are not just throwing everything you've noticed in both poems into your response. You need to bring them back to the core focus of the question. And my advice there would be, after every paragraph that you write, make sure you are revisiting that central question. Ask yourself very quickly, am I answering that question? Am I talking about childhood memories if I've gone for this one? Am I still focusing on the act of observing if I've gone for that one? If you have, brilliant, well done, carry on. Next paragraph. If you feel you're wandering off topic, then that's why you pause at the end of every paragraph that you write, because it would get you back on track. Okay, 30 marks. What's the examiner going to be looking for this one? Well, overall, I think it's worth pointing out in the mark scheme, a couple of highlighted things there. Mark schemes should be applied positively. Candidates must be rewarded for what they have shown they can do, rather than penalised for omissions. I get asked repeatedly by students, are the examiners going to deduct marks if? Are they going to knock marks off me if I do this? And the general guidance to the examiner is that no. The mark scheme is a flaw, it is not a ceiling, it is where they start. And actually, without going into too much detail on the content of each of the responses they would have been expecting, this is the indicative content. So this is what an examiner would see as the kinds of things you might be wanting to talk about in either of the choices of those questions. But look at the highlight here. These are suggestions only. Reward any valid alternative response. And that is saying to an examiner, if the candidate has made an interesting point, they are answering the question, but what they have said sits outside of this indicative content, then it still should be worthy of some marks. Examiners don't penalise you. Okay, they look for any opportunity where they can give you marks. So this is the beauty of English and English literature. Unlike more prescriptive or binary subjects like your maths and your sciences, Sometimes there are right and wrong answers in those types of subjects. But in English, if you're able to argue your point as convincingly as possible, you find something insightful and clever to say, and it answers the question, you will get credit. You will be rewarded for any valid response. Okay? Another thing to mention is all the marks on the mark scheme are designed to be awarded. So there is a myth that there is a ceiling on marks and no student ever gets full marks, and that is not right. You know, there are occasions where students will get full marks, because if an examiner has deemed that the candidate has done everything they possibly can, then the full marks are up for grabs. And that line there, content will not be exhaustive. So whatever mark scheme the examiner has in front of them, or any mark scheme you've been using in your preparation for this exam, just bear in mind that they are not comprehensive. There is always something else you can say. In terms of the mark scheme, just look at the language. So for 30 marks, for either question 1 or 2, if you're into level 5, so this is 25 to 30 marks, you are being critical and evaluative. Level 4 is discriminating, it's controlled. Level 3 is clear. Level 2 is only showing general understanding, and level 1 is largely descriptive. I would hope we're all aiming for something better than that, because that effectively just describes the poems and says what you see. Whereas at this level, you have demonstrated that within a very short space of time, you've been able to really get to grips with a poem you've never seen before the day of that exam, as well as knowing the poem you have studied before the exam in very, very critical evaluative detail. And you're able to show very nuanced, clever, insightful points about the ways in which the writers, both poets, are creating meaning, how they are able to craft language and structure to have an impact on the reader. Okay. For section A, you may notice across the top that they are assessing you for AO1, AO2 and AO4. In case you don't know what that means, AO1 is your response, how creative, how insightful you've been to the text. AO2 is analysing the ways in which meanings are shaped. And the differentiator between section A and section B is section A is AO4. So that is asking for how well you've been able to explore connections across the text. So this is your comparative work. This is you being able to find a good balance in similarities and differences between the two poems. I'll come to section B mark scheme in a moment, but their focus there will be on AO3 instead of AO4. AO3 is to do with the context and the significance, the influence of the time, the context in which the texts were written. So just be aware that for section A, we are looking at AO1, AO2, and AO4. It seems an obvious thing to say, but I'll mention it anyway. When you have planned and decided on which of the two responses you're going to go for with section A, do make sure you indicate your choice, either question 1 or question 2. It's taken as a given that your answer should make that clear, but there have been occasions in my experience when you begin reading a piece and it isn't quite clear, or even in the worst case scenario, a student has hybridized the response and it's not very clear which of the two questions they've answered. So just put a cross in the box based on the question you've chosen. Now, when it comes to section B, this is where there is a fair old cluster of different options. Now, again, I'm not going to go through all of these because it will depend on what your centre has chosen to teach. So there will be a lot in your exam paper that simply doesn't apply to you. Again, you will be looking for whichever of the options you've been taught. There are 12 possible clusters. So you have medieval poetic drama, you have medieval poet Chaucer, you have metaphysical poets, you have John Donne, you have the Romantics, you have John Keats, the Victorians, Rossetti poetry, modernism, T.S. Eliot, the movement, you've got Larkin. So again, whichever the cluster you've chosen, and whichever of the two question options you decide to go for, make sure it's clear before you start. Now, I will just choose for the sake of this to talk about Rossetti because that is what our centre teaches. Again, you get a choice. You are either doing this one or you're doing this one. Explore the ways Rossetti presents loss in Twice and One Other Poem. Explore the ways in which Rossetti presents the passing of time in Piteous My Rhyme Is and One Other Poem. So again, the common misconception is that there will be one that's easier than the other. That's not the case. The only difference will be for you on the day. You will have confidence perhaps in one of the named texts, and hopefully you will be able to draw together another choice of a different text to use in your response. And again, if we come to the mark scheme on this, there will be indicative content. So a number of suggestions of things that the exam board, the examiner would like to see for either of the options. But again, look at that highlighted line. These are suggestions only. Reward any valid alternative response. So they are looking for how insightful, how clever, how perceptive the points you can make. And in my experience as an examiner, I think the X factor, one of the things we look for is where a student has had their own thoughts and ideas and feelings about the text that they've chosen to write about, rather than just regurgitating verbatim what a teacher has taught them or a teacher has told them to say. It's hard to explain what I mean, but it's very obvious when you're marking a centre and you get same repeated points come up time and again. There will be that one student who comes up with things outside of what they've been taught. And that's generally the more insightful, the perceptive, the nuanced. So wherever possible, try to demonstrate your own thoughts and your own feelings about the text, because that personal engagement is everything. In terms of the mark scheme on this one, very similar to section A, except, as I mentioned previously, you have the AO1 and the AO2, but on this occasion, the AO3 is slightly different. So if we go back to what AO3 is, it's your ability to demonstrate the understanding of the significance and influence of context in which the literary texts are written and received. So hopefully, whichever cluster you were taught, you were spending some time on context, because look at it where it is in the mark scheme. For level 5, up to 30 marks for this, you are presenting a sophisticated evaluation and appreciation of the significance and influence of the contextual factors. So depending on the time, the life of the writer, what was going on in the world whenever that piece was written or the pieces were written, how well are you able to apply those contextual factors to be able to discuss the impact of those contexts on the piece you're writing about. I hope that's been of some use to you. Remember, examiners are not looking for perfection. What they are looking for you to do is primarily answer the questions and your skills in being able to deal with unseen text. But I think at A level, advanced level, what they are really looking for is for your personal response, your personal engagement, what the texts have made you think and feel, because that shows a higher order level of thinking. They are also looking for you to be critical, to be sophisticated, to be insightful, and to use the whole spectrum of literary devices, structural devices that you've been taught and you've studied over the past 2 years. If you found this content useful, please be sure to like. If you've got any questions, give me a comment below and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. And please subscribe and share the channel. Good luck, everybody. I'm sure you'll be fine.